depending from where you are connecting from. So today I'm very happy to be here with you guys, and my name is Mam Omar Diop. I'm a national from Senegal and the acting head of office and representative of UNESCO here in Côte d'Ivoire in Abidjan. Today I'll talk about the African documentary heritage and oral culture. So I'm very happy and pleased to give you this content, which will be organized through different parts. So first we will look at the context. So we'll go through history, the role and the power of oral tradition here in Africa, the creation of oral archives in Africa, the typology of oral traditions, and we'll explore the problems concerning the oral archives. And finally, talk about the safeguarding of African archives and some possible solutions, and conclude with that. So first of all, I would like to emphasize that this text I am using for this lecture is on African orality. And it is a lecture that was done by Professor Morjay, a researcher at the Dakar School of Librarians, Archivist and Documentalist. In French we call it EBAD, and that lecture was done in 2002 for the modules Archives, but for who and why. And he had the opportunity to give that lecture through the online classes of the International Portal of Francophone Activities, Archives. So in Africa, when an old man dies, it is a library that burns. I'm pretty sure that you have already heard about this very famous say that was done by our late Amadou Hampâté Bâ, who was a Malian writer who lived from 1900 to 1991. Please note that Amadou Hampâté Bâ was also an ex-member of the UNESCO Executive Committee, and he was worldwide known through his work that he consecrated to African tradition and civilization. In Africa, old men and griots were in charge of oral testimonies and the transmission of the memory from one generation to another. For that, they played a crucial role in the education of young people by telling them stories about the glory of their ancestors, but also this was one way for storytellers to warn them to warn the youngsters, the young generation, against the bad behaviors which would not be worthy of their tribe's past. Reputation is something very important in the African culture. So for those storytellers, they were coming and talking about, values and attitudes of the ancestors that the youngsters should carry on in their everyday life. But during the different African conquests between natives and Occidental colonialists, the griots were on the front line, playing the tam-tam, which is a drum, it's the local drum in Africa, and worshipping for their warriors, giving them courage, motivation, and a real desire to fight the enemy. In fact, the griots were considered as untouchable on the battlefield. No party involved in the war was allowed to attack them, just as today, the journalists who may even sometimes need protection to their job. So the griots could not be attacked during the war. So they could move along the troops and then give them courage and motivate them and reminding them the values of their ancestors and talk about several things that would give them more motivation to attack and then conquer the enemy. So according to Raphaël Ndiaye's work about tradition orale de la collecte à la numérisation, so oral tradition from data collection to digitalization, during the IFLA Council and General Conference in August 1999 in Bangkok. He said, "Oral tradition represents the sum of data that a society deems essential and worthy to be kept and codified, mainly in oral format, to facilitate their memorization and thus passing them down to the next generations." Oral tradition represents an important place in African history, as Amadou Hampâté Bâ highlighted. He said, "Oral tradition is at the heart of African history, from knowledge heritage of all orders, from mouth to ear, and from master to student through the age." I repeat, oral tradition is at the heart of African history, from knowledge heritage of all orders, from mouth to ears, and from the master to student through the age. This affirmation of the late Malian writer, also known as Amou Kelel, or the Pearl Child, Pearl is Fulani, is all the more true insofar as French Occidental Africa's history has been mainly written with the help of oral stories through indigenous people. Moreover, the desire to know the history of the people and societies without scriptures led the anthropological and ethnological research to collect oral tradition data as essential to the research process. This desire got reinforced with the expansion of Occidental powers as soon as they engaged in colonialism. It is a way for them to grasp a better understanding of the conquered territories, to satisfy a healthy scientific curiosity, but also to confirm their domination. Since 1935, the general governor of AOF, the French West African territories at that time, he puts forward the collecting of oral archives. These were done under the direction of the first archivist of AOF, Marguerite Verda. The collection of these oral sources was made through oral testimonies, old men and griots. It's very important, old men, because they have lived through generation, and then the griots because they are entitled to have that function of telling the stories. So they did the collection of these oral sources with the testimonies, the oral testimonies from the old men and griots, but also with life stories, speeches, conferences, roundtables, shows, recordings, ancient scriptures, books, and so on and so on. The Fundamental Institute of Black Africa, IFA, of Cheikh Anta Diop, possesses an Islamology. So it's the science of Islam, the science of Muslim religion, which is a department that is hosted at the Fundamental Institute of Black Africa, which is in Dakar. They constituted mainly with sound archives and testimonies of certain marabout. Marabout are people who are leading the religious brotherhoods. So again, I'm coming back to the Fundamental Institute of Black Africa. They constituted mainly with sound archives and testimonies of certain marabout families of Senegal. And based on that, we were able to do some kind of typology of certain oral traditions. There are different types. And Honora Agassi, in his work, said oral tradition, contemporary literature source in Africa, distinguishes 5 fields in oral tradition, 5 fields. The first one concerns the proverbs, African proverbs, the stories, the tales, the sayings, the parables, songs, legends, family mottos, villages and family stories. This is the category of oral tradition that belongs to the popular culture and that concerns our daily life with essential factors relating to the socialization of individuals. So that's the first category, the first type in this typology. We said we have 5, right? Now the second concerns the toponymy and anthroponymy with litanies of family, individuals of group of families that have a history related to the creation of a certain location. In Africa, you will see that because one man lived in one area, or a family or a group of individuals, then that area takes a whole history and the name and a lot of saying units. So they use that second type of source of data. Then now we are moving to the third. The third type is that of arts and crafts. The dances, the musical instruments, the costumes, and the cooking, paintings, acting, basketry, pottery, etc. This third is very important because in Africa we have these traditional masks, costumes, and then by seeing them you can understand a lot of history behind it and a lot of things being said with these representations or with these physical dances or the musical instruments, even the sounds, they tell you something. The fourth field, the fourth type, is that of phytotherapy and psychotherapy. Everything related to pharmacopoeia and healers. So the traditional medicine, the traditional plants, and how to go about curing some of the diseases. Those also are sources of data that can tell us about the heritage. And the fifth and last one is that of the myth. The myths and cultural elements transported via storytelling, religious rites, cultural drum languages, which ask a lot of patience and meticulousness from the researchers. The use of the drum, the sound that it gives, most of the time some ethnical groups and some tribes has used it to communicate, because, and at that time I believe that it was quite advanced, because it was a technology by hearing sounds, by having some kind of also reads that people can grasp the message which is embedded in, and those are also other kinds of source and the fifth kind of type of data that could be done. Now the problems which are limiting and which concerns the oral archives. Of course, there are a lot of things that can be derived from all what is being said, but at the same time, it's quite limited if we have this kind of things in terms of scientific research. The main issue with oral archives is the authenticity of sources. That's the main issue. We cannot always be sure about the fidelity and the accuracy of the stories told by witnesses, and of which we do not know the motives. This lack of authenticity in the transmission of oral tradition is in fact more common with the griots than with regular old African people. You know, earlier we talked about the griots being a tribe that is dedicated to tell stories, to kind of bring in the values and the inheritance from the ancestors to the young generation. So we have the griots, so it's dedicated to them. But at the same time, we have the old men who has lived through generation and have accumulated some experience. They can give us, also share their life experience. So in fact, the griots are often used to romanticize stories so that they appear more attractive without considering sometimes the truth. This is most of the times motivated by a desire to please the audience, thus earning some money or some gift with the related families, and also not to offend anyone. Speech is crucial to the transmission of oral tradition because knowledge is like a source of light inside human beings. That is what was said by Cherno Bokar. Knowledge is like a source of light inside human beings. Cherno Bokar was the spiritual father of Amadou Hampâté Bâ. Knowledge is a light in human beings. It is the heritage of everything that ancestors knew and that they passed on in a germ. Like a baobab tree is contained in a power seed which is going to be planted. So between all of the difficulties concerning the collection of oral archives, we can distinguish the transcription of sources by considering all the subtleties of languages and dialects, syntax, grammar, etc. The cost of transcription. The cost of transcription, especially for countries in sub-Saharan Africa. Transcriptions costs are very huge. They cost a lot of money. That leads many archives services to meet financial problems, which in turn delays the process of sources. It takes up to a year to transcript sources that were collected in a single month. A year to transcript sources that were collected in a single month. So you can guess the high cost of such a way of treating the data. And the other difficulty is the lack of fidelity, the accuracy, lack of accuracy in the transcriptions. We sometimes silence on historical events. Sometimes one part of the mountain can be counted or can be depicted, but the other part of the mountain may be just silenced. Another one is the total lack of chronology in oral tradition, especially in Africa. So the chronology, to find the different dates pertaining to the events, we often use the approximative method. Thus, it is impossible to take, for example, a specific year with abundant harvest, or on the contrary, on where they were bad because of a lack of rain. From this point, we can observe that there is no detailed chronology in oral African traditions. At the end, we can say that oral sources allow us to preserve the inheritance and cultural tradition of a people. This has been quickly understood by the first president of independent Senegal, Léopold Sédar Senghor, who took the initiative to call out for the development of culture right after Senegal's got access of its sovereignty in 1960. His famous quote remains, culture is at the beginning and at the end of development. Now, how do we go about safeguarding our African archives? To remedy the challenges related to orality in Africa, actions are being taken. They will make it possible to support certain foundations, such as that of Amadou Hampâté Bâ, in order to achieve better conservation and accessibility of its collection. The Amadou Hampâté Bâ Foundation is based here in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and hosts a wealth of manuscripts and a wealth of speeches, notes, and also some kind of recordings and of the climate conditions. Because of the lack of resources and all these issues that we outlined earlier, they are needing to have some kind of attention, because we believe that we have the griots, which is a tribe, and they are dedicated to give the values and to give courage to people when they are doing something. But at the same time, the most also natural thing is the old man who have lived through generation and passed several experiences, they should be able also to give us the wealth of experience they have. Yeah, those climate conditions sometimes makes it very hard for people to hold what we have inherited from our old men. But at the same time, we were very lucky that sometimes their family have had the opportunity to kind of hold and then secure most of the inheritance, which is translated in paper or on paper or some kind of notes and speeches that were pronounced, but at the same time, sometimes of education discussion that they have had with these old men. And that is why when he said, when an old man dies, it's all of the whole of a library which is burning, so you can get the image that our old men are not just elders, but at the same time they are treated as living libraries. So thus in Côte d'Ivoire, with the aim of safeguarding the endangered manuscripts and archives of the Amadou Hampâté Bâ Foundation, as well as improving equitable and inclusive access to them, a project that worth more than $590,000 was funded by the Republic of Korea and is going to be implemented in over 3 years. Throughout this presentation, we have tried to show the importance of oral tradition in Africa, its importance for education, and finally its limits, but also some solutions to preserve this wealth. Now, if I zoom into the project on Amadou Hampâté Bâ. Amadou Hampâté Bâ is a famous Malian writer and ethnologist. He was also a defender of the oral tradition, especially the Peul. Peul is what we call most of the time Fulani. It's a tribe that is present from East Africa to West Africa, and we can find them in different countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And he was one of the leaders in this tribe. He was a member of the executive board of UNESCO. Can you believe it? From 1962 to 1970. And he is the one who launched during this executive board his appeal in Africa: when an old man dies, it's a library that burns. It was a formula that was said during the executive board in UNESCO, and that formula since has become proverbial. In the Amadou Hampâté Bâ Foundation, over 1,000 unpublished handwritten documents and manuscripts are collected and conserved. But they are the results of his personal research. This includes the collection of African oral traditions such as morals, customs, ceremonies, studies of African languages, along with untranslated Arabic manuscript for nearly 50 years. Nearly 50 years. Why Arabic manuscripts? Because at that time, most of African who were even called illiterate could write in Arabic manuscript, Arabic script, because of the coming of the Islam in this region, and then people learned how to read and write Arabic, and they used it at the same time also for the same communication. So, in addition, a collection of correspondences between African heads of states and himself, some typescripts of international conferences related to history, religion, symbolism, literature, peace and dialogue of cultures are stored at this foundation here in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire. There are also published work, some published work that are accessible. including a private library whose autographs show the author's wide relations throughout the world. And he had relations with the intellectuals of his time. In this context, the foundation was recognized as being a public interest by the President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. Alassane Ouattara. However, the archives of the Amadou Hampâté Bâ Foundation have been under an unstable preservation environment for several years, which has led to the degraded condition of the collection. The paper documents have become acidified and brittle. Attached substances such as glues accelerated over browning of this paper. Water leakage, there is a lot of rain here. It rains heavily and we experience a lot of tropical rains in this area of the world. And high relative humidity, which is nearing some 80% humidity in the storage rooms, cause mold to spread over. In addition, inappropriate conservation practices such as hazardous handling, unsuitable storages, etc. have subjected this heritage to a high risk of disappearance. So you can understand the utility of this wealthy treasure that we are having here in Abidjan, and we are so grateful, so grateful to the National Archives of Korea to have agreed to accompany this foundation in not only creating the conditions to secure those wealth of manuscripts, but also to do some capacity development, capacity building of the existing staff on how to preserve the techniques, but at the same time on how to put it on the digital platform, so that it can be secured forever, but at the same time accessible from wherever we are. So I'm very happy now. I am reaching the end of my lecture, but was very pleased to be with you and to make this case on oral tradition and African documentary. Thank you.